Hello everybody, in this video we are going to look on some strategies how to animate things. These strategies were the same which I used during the Transcend videos, which can be found on the Nanocem website. Let's start with looking on how to animate a simple text so that it looks like it writes himself. The text we are going to animate needs a new layer, so we click here on New Layer and have then and just write here staple animations needed for cement videos. So we also want this to be a bit bigger, so we make it here size 50, put it in place, label it and say headline. So excellent. Now we see it is a single text object, so we press Ctrl B to break it down. Now it's single letters, but still individual text objects, so we press Ctrl B again, and now this is standard lined. We zoom in a bit to see a bit more, and select the eraser. And by pressing F6, we create a new so-called keyframe here in the timeline. And if we now edit something here, we only edit this keyframe, and we do this by just deleting the S. We do this again, delete the O. We do this again, delete the E. Do this again, delete the D. You can already see now if we move here the cursor of the play marker, if you want, so in the timeline we see that the video looks like it is self-deleted or self-written. In order to spare you to see it all, we just do another one, press F6, delete the I, press F6, delete the V. You can see it again. I've just prepared something, so we click here on the I, so hide this layer and switch the prepared layer on, and I have done it all. And you see if we click play now, the same thing appears which was already visible in the thing we have just done together. The whole thing disappears. And in order to make it self-writing, we mark all the layers by pressing Shift and clicking in the timeline, right mouse button and click on reverse frames, and voila, staple animations needed for cement science writes itself. So let's delete this first layer and call this properly headline. And now we insert a second layer for the author. So the author, that's in this case that's me, so we just say this Merlin Edsold, and we place at appropriate position, also alter the size, say 30. But we see they both they are there at the same time. We don't want to animate the author, but we just want to make sure that they appear consecutively, so we move them in the timeline. But still they are not at the same time, because here the timeline for the headline is empty after the 40th frame, so we press F5 to fill them up to make sure that they are still visible. And now we have the whole animation as we wanted it. And it says now staple animations for cement videos made by Merlin Edsold. So let's go on and look on how to make something self-drawing and how to move things. So we have here a single layer which contains the NMR device, the computer, and a test tube. So the first thing to do is to split this on different layers. So we mark the test tube, cut it out, with which is Ctrl X, click on this layer, which should be the test tube, and now we press Ctrl, Shift and V to make this thing appear exactly at the same spot where we have cut them out. And the same we do with the computer. We mark it after the auto recovery has finished, press Ctrl X to cut it out and put it in its own layer, which we call computer, and then again Ctrl Shift V to paste it exactly where we cut it. However, we just want to look at the NMR, so we press F6. This didn't work, so you shouldn't mark it all. Just click here in the timeline, press F6 to create a new keyframe. We choose the eraser again and start deleting the NMR, very similar as we did this for the self-writing text. So we delete a bit, press F6, delete a bit, press F6, delete a bit, press F6, and so on. So you probably want to do this in a way that it appears natural as you may draw it. I may be a bit sloppy about this at the moment. Up. And it's all deleted now. You can see that the layer is empty by having an empty dot in the keyframe. So we actually can delete this keyframe by just saying clear keyframe. And then we see the NMR is deleting itself, and as we have already done it for the self-writing text, by reversing the order of the frames and deleting this long bit here. Click, remove frames. We have a self-drawing NMR machine. We could try to insert, a blank keyframe here and move it at the beginning, so that the first frame is empty before it appears. So I think that's cool. We want now that the NMR appears first and then the computer afterwards. So we do this by moving things in the timeline as before, and the test tube should appear after the computer has appeared, and they all should be visible to the end of the animation. So we press F5 to fill up the timeline. This didn't work really. So, and what are we having now? First the NMR machine appears, then the computer, and then the timeline. So now the NMR tube should be shrunk so that it fits into the NMR machine and then move in there. So in order to do that, we need to change the type of the NMR tube. At the moment, the NMR test tube is actually composed by its individual objects, like here's a gray area, the lines, and so on. In order to move it around, the first thing which needs to be done is it needs to be converted into an object, which we do by pressing F8, and then we convert it to a symbol. The symbol we call just test tube. It's probably reasonable to do. Oh, from practicing I've done this already, so we just call it test tube 2. And now you see it changes into this frame, which means now it is a symbol. Then in order to move it around, we need to insert something in the timeline, so we just mark the timeline, select the timeline and click Motion Tween. And the Motion Tween is a tool which can be used to interpolate steps in between frames for transforms like scaling and moving around. Tween actually comes from in between. So we select it now and select keyframe. And at this keyframe, we just edit only the keyframe. Here we use the transform tool. We press Shift and just shrink it by holding the mouse button and Shift. I think that looks like a good size. Release it. And now, because we have this tween here, this motion tween, Flash interpolates the steps needed to shrink it. Now we want to move the NMR tube into the NMR device, so we insert another keyframe here and just move the shrunk NMR tube into the sample holder. And we see now it shrinks first and then moves to the sample holder. However, this is probably not as nice, so we insert some point in between. We press F6 to make a keyframe, and again alter the position. And we want another one so that it's inserted vertically. Yeah, I think this looks good. Here, arrange them a bit in the timeline to have them look better, and the NMR tube appears, shrinks, and moves into the NMR device. One now can start playing by hiding, in order to make sure to have an effect that the NMR tube disappears in the device. You can move the NMR before the tube And in this case, since the NMR takes precedence in display over the tube, it now looks like the tube disappears in the machine. Here's the tube, moves, and it's gone. Of course, one can optimize this disappearing of it, but I think for the purpose of this introduction, the principle has been illustrated well. Another very important thing is what has to be done if one does these science animation, is one has to think about how to make nice graphs. This graph is copied from the PhD thesis of Andrew Muller, and while it certainly looks nice enough for the thesis, for the animation this is a bit dull. So what I do is I copy the graphs in the animation like this, and I insert them into a special layer which is called Guide. So you click right mouse button, Properties, and then you click Guide here, which means that this layer never shows up in the final video, but it is visible for you. And then you can start essentially redrawing the whole graphic just by using this as a base. For example, we now take one of the graphs, let's say the 28-day graph, and to do this we use this special tool here, which is a pen tool. We actually want this standard pen tool P. It's very powerful, and you can essentially just use it in the first step to click somewhere to insert points and to connect these points. It's a bit thick. Let's do only 3. This looks much better. So going back to the pen tool, and we now want to get the slope. A special thing with the pen tool is that you can insert points where you can define the tangent of the line just by pressing the mouse button, holding and pulling. There are tutorials also available just how to use this pen tool, and it's very worth to spend time to this because it's very powerful. You just click. No, this was not perfect. Just click in order to then get the line. Then we have the same thing here. One has always, I'm also not perfect using the pen tool, but one can essentially use this hold the mouse button and pull mechanism to adjust the curvature of the line. And as I said, this is a very useful and powerful mechanism. And of course you can also just approximate the line as multiple points, which may make things a bit easier. Here we just do a very simple one and finish the graph. And I think it is obvious that one can play with this and have the graphs in different the individual peaks in different colors and so on. It is worth to note that if one has a line, and it doesn't matter how one generated the line in the first place, and then uses this right button, one can adjust these anchor points, as you see here, in case you want to make things a bit more symmetric or change the curvature. You can pull here on these tangent markers, double click on an anchor pointers, and you get these tangent markers, and they can be altered individually for each side. Another thing is if you use the pen tool, double click on the pen tool and use the add anchor point tool, you figure out you can insert additional anchor points if you feel that you need more in order to get a nice curve. So we call this here good and call this curve 28 days. So in order to draw the box, you first make a new layer, which we call box, or I call them always box, but maybe the word axis is more appropriate. And then you use this line tool. You click, move them. Normally you can choose any angle, but in this case the shift function is nice because it forces the line to be aligned with one of the principal directions. Let go, and the axis placed. However, you may see that it needs some precision adjustment, which can be done by using the arrow buttons. Okay, and the same thing we do for the others, but before we do this, we click here on the lock button for the layer with the graph, and also on the lock button for the curve, so that we don't accidentally change the layer. We draw the axis. Oh, and here I didn't go far enough, so in this case we use the transform tool to pull the length, to pull the thing to the right length. Here we move the anchor point of the transformation to the desired endpoint to make sure transformation works, and do it again. Perfect. And now we have nice axis, and in order to get the labeling right, we do the principal labels only. It's just pretty tedious. If you wonder why it takes so long to do these videos, you know now why. And then insert the labels using the text function. And it is always good with these videos to have large labels. So don't be afraid to make them much bigger than in the original work. And here we he just also makes them in black. And now we could, if we just say we want one graph, we could move it a bit down and shrink the box to have a more convenient diagram, and just delete the excess. So, and if we now click here and hide the underlying layer, we see, oops, we forgot something. The limiting bits, so we can quickly draw them in. And now we have a nice diagram which can be used in the videos without looking so coarse and a bit pixely as those which one can extract from thesis. The last thing I would like to look at is to do a rearrangement. This is that we see how can such a graph be animated. This can be found in the video about Noemi thesis, where this is a model for CSH, where these CSH pores disappear when the structure is dried. However, doing this would take a lot of time, so we demonstrate only with a very simple example. And the simple example here are these two lines which we want to get to develop some buckles. So how do we do this? First of all, the two lines have to be moved into separate layers. So we click Ctrl X to to cut one of them out, and then Shift Ctrl V to make to insert into the other layer. I think layer 1, layer 2 can stay now. And if one wants to do random transforms or random changes in shape, the thing to use is called a shape tween. So we insert a shape tween here and a shape tween here, and we just press F5 to generate some frames. And now we can define states in the shape tween using keyframes. So we press F6 to insert the keyframe. You've probably seen this already doing making the self-writing text. And now we alter the shape of these lines. To do so, we use the pen tool with the add anchor point. So we click here and add 3 anchor points, and here for this one, for the other line we do the same. And now we use the subselection tool to move these a bit out. And here we do the same. And since the whole thing should be a bit smoother, we also use the convert anchor point tool to get these nice CSH-like pores if you're in this, but it doesn't matter. So we have now these nice bumps in there, and if we just do the animation, we see now that Adobe Flash interpolates how these lines deform. However, this only works to some extent. We can now try to do something even more, to make more deformation, which will most likely work. For example, here we insert another anchor point. Now we pull this one up. And again use the convert anchor point tool to make it round. The same we do here. It's the other one. You need obviously some extra points. Use the convert anchor point tool. And I think this looks pretty nice. However, if we now did something where is no direct transformation possible, Adobe Flash will still do an interpolation. This is a very brute force interpolation algorithm, and if you look in the manual, it will tell you exactly that. So to demonstrate what can also happen, we insert another keyframe here and just draw something else in there, like an empty white box. Well, it's obvious. We move it here. It's obviously not white, so let's change this. And let's see what happens now. We see the transformation, the animation as we wanted, but now the box is somehow created. And this is obviously something you don't want. And the way to deal with this, if you use this animation tool, is to keep the animations as simple as possible. And if you get such an undesired effect, just break down the animation into smaller pieces and try again. So that's it. These are all the staple animations you need, I think.